pair of classic revolvers customized for the sport of PPC competition on this Wheel Gun Wednesday. I want to welcome you to Riders Range and thank you for joining me while I showcase two very special wheel guns that are dear to my heart. So I may or may not have mentioned in the past that I was active in the PPC circuit from the late 70s until the mid-90s, and here's where you're supposed to ask, what is PPC? Well, technically it means Precision Pistol Competition. Once upon a time it was also called Police Pistol Combat or Practical Pistol Competition, and originally it was for police and military only, and therefore it was called police. And they considered it back in, when this was originally developed back in the late 50s, they considered it practical, although we know by today's standards this is really nothing in the way of practical for shooting. But now it's open to civilians, so the police pistol competition part of it is not really important. But we'll get back to what PPC is a little bit later as we talk about some of the unique features of these guns. Now, I started PPC back in the late 70s. I started with a K38 revolver, and it was decent at the time. However, I very quickly found out that K38 is not going to win very many matches. In good hands, it can do a lot, but there's no way in the world it can keep up with the custom features of these PPC guns. So at the time, I had the late Lynn Alexiou, also known as Trapper, build this very, very nice PPC gun. And this served me very well for actually until the end of 1985. I think the 1985 season was the last season I used this particular gun, and that's only because in Las Vegas at their regional or their invitational back in late 1985 at the Four Queens regional, the Western Classic is where I used the Trapper to win this Davis Windmaster. We're going to talk about the similarities and differences of both of these very, very fine PPC guns here shortly. This Davis Windmaster served me well on the PPC circuit for 10 years, and it has had a lot of ammunition through the barrel. So there are some substantial differences between these two guns. Both of these were built on a Model 10 frame. This particular one, the Trapper, is built on a 10-5. The Davis was built on a 10-6, but again, basically Model 10s. At the time, gun makers didn't want to spring for a gun that already had things on it they were going to throw away, like longer barrel, adjustable sights and so forth, so they put them on the cheapest platform they could find, and the Model 10 worked out quite well. These were only firing, designed to fire anyway, 38 special match 148 grain lead wad cutters, and for most of my career I used Federal 38A loads and used them very, very well. So therefore they weren't built generally on 357 frames, because the chamber in the 357 is obviously just a little bit longer, and therefore you've got just that slight gap between the end of the cartridge and that ridge at the end of a 357 chamber. Both of these obviously have heavy barrels. Both of them have Aristocrat ribs, although the Aristocrat design, or Aristocrat rib itself on the Davis is a little bit different than obviously the one is on the Trapper. We'll talk about those here when the differences come around. These are both well tuned, and this one, Trapper did all the work on his gun. The Davis Windmaster I actually sent to my good friend Joe Leninger off at MoJo Custom to do the action on this, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the differences, but he did a wonderful job on that Davis gun. Both of them have radiused and polished triggers, a little bit better with the MoJo work on this Davis here. Perfectly smooth, no ridges on it to let the finger roll around it in double action. And by the way, these are both double action only. Now you see a hammer spur on the Trapper here, but that won't fire in single action, and we'll show you why. Because the hammer does not stay back in single action, and that's because of the trigger stop. We'll talk more about that here in just a second. But you compare that with a Model 19, and when you pull the hammer back, you'll notice the trigger rebounds just a little bit. There's just a little bit of movement after getting the hammer all the way back into where it takes it set. And with a properly tuned trigger stop, over travel stop, that takes up just that little bit of space. So therefore you can't shoot this single action. Now, in a PPC competition, the only time you're allowed to shoot single action is at the 50-yard line, and these guns work just as well double as they do single, so there's no sense having single, even though that one still had the hammer spur on it. Both of these have a ball detent in the crane. Now, normally a Smith & Wesson will lock up at the front of the extractor and at the very back of the extractor pin. Those are the only two lockup points. So theoretically, there can be a little bit of flex in the center. In order to keep the cylinder perfectly aligned with the forcing cone, they put that little ball detent in there just to help keep it in place. Now this gun, you'll see, it doesn't lock up real tight. Even with the trigger pulled back, there's a little bit of play in this. But when you figure this gun has had more than 100,000 rounds through it without any work done on it, and that means it's had probably around 1 million pulls of the trigger, because for every live round I fired, I probably dry practiced this one at least 10 pulls of the trigger for every one live round. The Trapper, on the other hand, is just a little bit tighter, just a little bit of rotation, but not much. So it does lock up better, but again, this only worked for 5 years as opposed to the 10 years that the Windmaster did. Both of these have recessed chambers, so when you're shooting flat nose wad cutter ammunition and you're using speed loaders, and you're in one stage now is down to I believe 20 seconds. It started out as 25 seconds for the 7-yard stage to fire 12 shots. So that means you got to shoot 6, reload, and shoot 6 more, all in 20 seconds. So it helps to have the cylinders just chamfered just a little bit, so it helps those wad cutters go in. Both of these guns have that. All right, both of these have recessed barrels. That way, if it does get knocked around, it doesn't damage the rifling. The Davis is not reverse chamfered. The Trapper is. There's definitely a reverse chamfer on that in addition to being recessed. And both of these guns are capable of X-ring accuracy at 50 yards. Now let me explain the X-ring on a B-27, which is the target that was being used for PPC competition. This is obviously a scaled down version, but the 10 ring itself is only 6 inches, just under 6 inches tall, 4 inches wide. The X-ring is half of that, just under 3 inches tall and 2 inches wide. So that means that in order to be competitive at all, almost all of your shots at 50 yards had to be within that 10 ring. Obviously, the more you can get the X-ring, the better, but it still only counts as 10 points. But both of these guns are definitely capable of X-ring accuracy using that quality match ammunition. So here's some of the differences. I mentioned that the Davis does not have a hammer spur. The Trapper does have one, but again, they're both double action only. And the Trapper, as nice as the action is on this, is about 7 1/4 pounds, which is still nice for a double action. And you see there is no over travel. So, and again, rotating through all 6 cylinders, there's very little difference between any of the 6, and about 7 1/4. The Davis, on the other hand, with a MoJo Custom action, is absolutely wonderful at about 5 1/2 pounds double action all day long, and it still has that same nice pull, no over travel at all, and just if you have a 5 1/2 pound double action trigger, I like it. Again, that's why I can shoot these things at double action at 50 yards, and as well as I can shoot single action. The sights are a little bit different too, and I mentioned they're Aristocrat ribs. You can see that it says Aristocrat on the side of this one. You'll see that it's got on the Trapper, there is a way to adjust this on the side with positions 1, 2, and 3, and you'll see what it does to the rear sight as I move that. Position 1 is there. Position 2, you can see it moves its sight down quite a bit. Position 3 moves it up just a little bit more. And then back to 1, moves it way up. And I'll explain the difference here in a minute, or the reason for that. But the Davis is a modification that was exclusive, I believe, to Davis, where you still have the adjustable rear sight, but you also have the front sight is set for 7, 25, or 50 yards, and that changes the height of the front sight in there. There's 7, see if I can do this with the camera. 25 and 50, and there's individual adjustments for the cam in each of those three positions. So why the difference in position? When shooting at the center of a B-27 at 7 yards or even 15 yards, they eventually modified match 1 to, instead of having 2 stages of 12 rounds, 25 seconds at 7 yards, too many people were getting 24Xs. So they made it a little more challenging by making it 20 seconds instead of 25 and having the second part of match 1 being at 15 yards. So even at 15 yards, it's fairly easy to find the center of a B-27 target. However, once you start getting out to 25 and 50 yards, that's a little bit of a different story. The target starts looking smaller and smaller yet. Now, these aren't perfectly to scale, but trying to sight on these at 25 and 50 yards and still being able to get all of the shots in the 10 ring, or preferably the X ring, makes it a little more challenging. So at 25 yards, again, these aren't to scale, but at 25 yards, let's see if I can show it with this target. First of all, we did always smoke the sights. We want them just as black as possible, so we used a little acetylene smoker to make these just soot black. And that's one reason why the wings are on the front, is to protect that front sight so that nothing takes the carbon black off of there. And let's see if I can get these things lined up here. You aren't going to see it that well because it won't focus on the target. But at 25 yards, you can see the sight is about the same. The front sight's roughly the same width as the neck, and we'd align the top of the sight alignment with the shoulders. Now the big thing here is don't mess the front sight up, or don't mistake it for one of the wings on the side. But we'd line the horizontal up with the shoulders and the vertical up with the head. Now you had a little more up and down play, because remember the regular B-27 is taller than it is wide for the scoring area. So you had a little more room to have air vertically, a little less room to have it horizontally. When you get out to 50 yards, then we want to be able to sight our point of aim pretty much at a 6 o'clock hold, or excuse me, at a center hold on a bullseye. And at 50 yards, the front sight on this gun is actually just about as wide, and this isn't to scale, just about as wide as the head of a B-27 looks at 50 yards. And it's fairly easy to get the elevation by looking at where the taper of the head is. The windage, with the sight being about the width of the head, means that the left and right will stabilize. Now, the sight radius on these guns is 8 inches. It's 7 3/4 on the Trapper, but it's 8 inches on this Davis Windmaster. And if you do the math and look at how far 50 yards is, what the multiple of 8 inches is, it's 225 times. So that means that for every fraction that the sights are misaligned on this gun, that is amplified 225 times at 50 yards. And if you got a 4-inch wide X or 10 ring that you're shooting at, 1/100th of an inch of sight misalignment on either of these guns translates into 2 1/4 inches of impact misalignment at 50 yards. So that means that when the bullet leaves the barrel, these guns have to be within less than 1/100th of an inch of perfect sight alignment and aim on the target. And that's where a couple of the features of these guns come in handy. The over travel stop means that there is no movement of the gun once the hammer is released from the trigger, because if there's even the slightest movement in that tiny fraction of a second between the time the trigger releases the hammer and the time the bullet leaves the barrel, that can almost be your 1/100th of an inch right there. So having an over travel stop that stops the trigger immediately upon the hammer being released is one thing. The second thing is in the barrels. Let me explain the difference on the barrels. You'll see that this one is about the width of the rib, not much more, whereas the Windmaster is hugely wide. But yet, the Windmaster is not quite as tall, at least in the front part of the barrel. So the Trapper is nice, even, roughly 0.875 in width. The Davis is almost 1.5 inches wide, whereas the height at least at the front, on the Davis is only a 1.15. And the height on the Trapper is 1.4. So the Trapper is taller. The Davis Windmaster is not quite as tall, much wider, which also means that it's heavier. Now you look at the weights of these guns, it is also a huge difference. The Trapper weighs in at 55.4 ounces. That means 3.74 pounds. Now that is with 5 empty cases. That's as light as this gun gets when you pull the trigger the last time. 5 empty cases and 1 round, 1 live round in it. That's as light as this gun gets during an actual competition as you're firing that last round. The Davis, on the other hand, weighs in at 61.9 ounces, which means 3 pounds, 13.9 ounces, and obviously a fair amount heavier. Contrast that with a 6-inch Model 19 with the same 5 empties and 1 live, and you're only at 40.5 ounces. Or look at it with a fully loaded 629 with 6 rounds of 240 grain ammunition. That's only 54 ounces. So a fully loaded 44 Magnum with 6 heavy bullets is still lighter than the Trapper, certainly lighter than the Davis Windmaster. So that weight is also what helps in stabilizing these guns. The same amount of input to move around a Model 19 or a K38 is going to move either of these guns less, so therefore any tension change in the hand is going to have less of an impact on a heavy gun than it does on a lighter gun. All of that helps in getting that 10-ring accuracy. Now, I have to admit, only a few times in my career did I ever manage to get all 24 shots, 6 sitting, 6 prone, 6 left-hand barricade, 6 right-hand barricade, and that's left-hand controlling the gun, too, at 50 yards. 24 shots, and only a few times did I ever get all 24 in the 10-ring. Most of the time, 1 or 2 managed to sneak out on me. Now, it's not always true that the guns make the difference, although when you get to the very top of the sport it is, and I never quite managed to get to the top, even though I certainly won my share of matches. Never won the Nationals. I certainly was nowhere near as good as the great retired Captain Philip Hemphill from the Mississippi State Highway Patrol. I think he won the Nationals like 10 times or more, and Phil has the national record of 1,500 points with 118 X's, so 1,500 out of 1,500 with 118 X's out of 150 shots. I was never that good, but these guns are certainly capable of doing that. So anyway, that's why the sights are set as they are, so you can change your point of aim and still get the same point of impact. Also, remember these light little 148 grain bullets, only moving at about 750 feet per second, will drop a fair amount during that 50 yards. In fact, shooting some hot, humid days down at the Detroit Police Department Rouge Range in a match, the air was thick enough we could actually see the bullets going through the air before they impact the target. So one other thing that these guns need is something that you aren't going to find normally off the shelf. For 5 years, I worked the Trapper in a Reno holster, and generally locked in a slight forward cant, so that the gun came out easily and naturally for PPC competition. Worked out well, but obviously the Reno holster, and you can see this does have a lot of wear on it. That's 5+ years, plus my wife also did some competing locally with this same gun and holster when I went to the Davis. Not going to fit in there, not in any way, shape, or form. So that means I had to go to a holster specifically designed for the Davis Windmaster. And this was actually a complete rig made by Bill Davis, not to be confused with the Bill Davis of the Davis Custom shop that made this fine gun, but it's actually G. William Davis, had Davis Leather Company. Probably says that on the back here somewhere, yeah, Davis Leather Company here at the bottom, and he was actually known as Gordon Davis, so I don't believe there's any connection between the two, although they're both from California. But he designed this this entire competition rig for this particular gun, and it's obviously a whole lot wider to fit the Davis Windmaster. The Trapper will still work in here if I need to. It's got a little bit of play, but it's still not going to come out because it does fit well with the cylinder up here. Again, for normal, we're not doing running and jumping and stuff, so for normal use, even a conventional gun, in fact, probably even the Model 19 would still fit in there if I needed to. But the Windmaster did require custom leather to be able to hold this in an NRA match. All right, so again, PPC is nowhere near as popular as it used to be. There still are the nationals. I shot them every year. They were out in Des Moines, Iowa. I shot the first year. They were down in Jackson, Mississippi. Have not shot competitively at the national level since then. In fact, I haven't shot anything since 1995 in PPC. However, I did shoot a local Chamber of Commerce match a few years ago. They had one stage was 10 shots bullseye at 50 feet with no equipment requirement, and I did shoot it one year with the actually I shot it with both of these guns at various times, and I did shoot in, I believe it was 2016. I used the Davis Windmaster and managed to get 10 shots, 10x at 50 feet with this gun standing without support. The gun will still do it even with that slightly loose cylinder. Even with my advancing age, the gun still works and still works well for me. So that is a maybe not so quick look at two guns that you don't see a lot of. And actually, you do a search for PPC on any of the auction sites. I did see a pristine, I believe it was a Windmaster, unfired, that went for like $1,550. And I saw a Trapper that was listed for, I want to say it was about $1,100, and not in real perfect shape, but still good guns for the game. In fact, this spring when things warm up, I may have to take it out to our range outside and set up a quick PPC course and see if I still can hit the target at 50 yards with these things. It'll be interesting to give it a try. So again, that's a not so quick look at two guns that are in the safe, that are very prized possessions. They'll be handed down to the family, and this is a one-of-a-kind Western Classic 4 Queens Invitational from Las Vegas Davis Windmaster, and probably not a one-of-a-kind, but certainly a very nice sample of what Trapper guns used to be back in the 80s. Right, if you like this video, we really do appreciate a thumbs up. This video shows two guns that have been in the terms of service in YouTube. They have been previously modified. That means that this video will not be monetized and not suitable for all advertisers, even though these guns are about as innocuous as you can get. So anyway, the thumbs up help get us noticed. Share these videos. Share them for Facebook, gun groups, whatever, to get the word out on these really fine samples of 1980s craftsmanship. If you haven't already done so, we really appreciate it if you subscribe, click on the notifications bell. And comments on this video down below are highly appreciated. The more comments we get, the more thumbs up we can get, the more people subscribing, the more it does boost Rider's Range up in the YouTube algorithms. And finally, comments on anything else, put them to info@ridersrange.com. And two fine PPC guns that I may have to take out and shoot again in the spring, shown here on Rider's Range. Hey, thanks for stopping in.